Sports Memories with Mac, Jack, and Doc on Northeast Streaming Sports. Every Saturday at 8 a.m. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mac, Jack, and Doc Sports Memory Show. We come to you every Saturday here on Northeast Streaming Sports, starting off the Roku channel as we do every morning. Me and Jack, anyway, and Doc's with us as always on Saturday as we start looking historically back on sports and how they progressed and gave us what they gave us today. Good morning, fellows. Good morning, everyone out there. And you know, the Yankees had a great team in the early 50s. And a lot of people talk about Maris and Mantle a lot, but there were other players in there. In fact, they were almost considered another murderer's row from way back in the 30s because they had a few guys, not just Maris and Mantle, that were hitting double digits home runs, some up in the 20s. And this is what Doc's going to talk about. One of these guys who played first base for the New York Yankees from 54 to 1967, Doc.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Bill Moose Skowron, who is, as you say, one of the forgotten Yankees. He came up in 1954, stayed with the Yankees until 1963. He was a Yankee in 62. In 63, he was traded, and he became a Los Angeles Dodger. He actually won a World Series with the Los Angeles Dodgers, beating his former teammates. Moose Skowron was an all-star 8 times. He played first base. He appeared he was on 5 different World Series championship teams. And he was a very, very, very good player, a big, strong right-handed hitter, solidified the Yankee infield in those late 50s, early 60s in those years. That really second half of the dynasty. You know, the first half of the dynasty was Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio was there and Allie Reynolds and Vic Raschi and Eddie Lopat. And then that second half of the dynasty was, Rizzuto was there in the first half. Yogi was the catcher. The second half, it's more Elston Howard being the catcher, Yogi playing some outfield, and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, as you said, and that great Yankee infield of players who a lot of them now forgotten about, but Moose Skowron at first, Bobby Richardson at second, Tony Kubek at short, and Clete Boyer at third. All outstanding players, but none of them Hall of Famers. And as the years go by, a lot of those guys get forgotten about. So Moose Skowron was one of those guys. He was steady at a lifetime 282 batting average. He was a power hitter, but he never hit 30 home runs in a year. He did have 4 20-plus home run seasons, 56, 60, 61, and 62. And then for really, maybe Jack knows a little bit better on this than I do, but after the 1962 season, the Yankees probably looking to go a little younger, looking at their next first baseman, Joe Pepitone, trade Moose Skowron, as we said, to the Dodgers for a pitcher. Pretty good pitcher, Stan Williams, but definitely not someone as noteworthy as Moose Skowron. And yeah, so Moose was one of those leaders on the Yankees, but he wasn't there for those last couple of years. As we said, he went to the Dodgers, traded for Stan Williams, and the next Yankee first baseman after that was Joe Pepitone. Moose Skowron then bounced around a bit. He played for the Dodgers in 63. In 64, he played for the Washington Senators and the Chicago White Sox. And then in 1967, he finished his time with the White Sox and finished his career with the California Angels. Now, I told these guys, Mac and Jack, that I had some fun trivia questions for them. So I'm just going to roll down here. That last trade, when he was traded from the White Sox to the Angels, he was traded for a player who's famous for something really having less to do with baseball and more to do with the fact that he was a 2-sport athlete. Who was he traded for?
Oh, that would have to be Dave DeBusschere.
It was not Dave DeBusschere.
If it was the White Sox. Wait, just that thing when he was on. when he was with the White Sox, he was traded. Is that what you said?
He was traded by the White Sox to the
Wow.
California Angels for
Oh,
a
to the
two-sport player.
California Angels. A two-sport player on the Angels, because I know Dave DeBusschere pitched for the White Sox, so I got it backwards. Angels two-sport player.
Maybe I'm wrong
Oh,
about this. I always thought this guy
Linsky
played in the
didn't play
NBA.
two-sport.
He played in the
Wow, at
NBA.
that time, I don't know.
The Lakers.
Did you ever hear of the name Cotton Nash?
No.
I'm pretty certain he played in the NBA at a very short
Cotton
major
Nash.
league. Cotton Nash.
I mean,
Well,
Cotton Nash.
I hope that was a
when you're doing your thing, when I see the name Cotton Nash, I'm almost certain that he played in the NBA. So anyway, I'm not an NBA guy, but that's who Moose Skowron was traded
Well, let me
for.
just say one thing very quickly. When you mentioned the trade with the Dodgers, you said the Yankees got a pretty good pitcher, Stan Williams. No, they got a pretty good pitching coach, because that's what Stan Williams became a little better known, I think, when his career was over.
Cotton Nash, American basketball player and Major League Baseball player. He was a forward in the NBA for the Los Angeles Lakers and the San Francisco Warriors.
I got the team right. I got the team right.
You completely stumped. I would have had no clue. I couldn't have gotten it.
Nash. Wow.
Ever,
See, you guys learn stuff from me.
Yes, we do. And Doc, I when I was reading about the Moose there, and of course, I'm trying to compare him to somebody I knew. Is it fair to compare him to Chris Chambliss? Is he a little bit better than Chris Chambliss was?
He's a lot better than Chris Chambliss.
A lot better, because I know when I read about him, and of course, they said he was perhaps the glue that hold the middle of that order together. When you're talking about the Yankees batting order, and in a year, one of the years or two of the years, they said they were formidable to the original, the Yankees murderers row, when they had Ruth and Garrett and the other players they had there, that they were that good at one time where they were comparing them to murderers row.
Yeah, I mean, they had a great team. In 1961, the Yankees set the record at that time for the most home runs in a season. I think they had 5 different players who hit 20 or more home runs that year. Mantle, Maris, Berra, Howard, maybe 6 guys, Skowron, and Johnny Blanchard. Maybe Yogi didn't hit 20 home runs that year. I'm not sure. We'd have to look that up. I thought it was 5 guys, but they had a bunch of guys at least who hit 20 or more home runs. The surprise being, of course, Johnny Blanchard, a backup catcher who had a lot of pop. But you mentioned Chris Chambliss. Now, this is interesting because Jack was asking before the show, if you take out Gehrig and Mattingly, who are the greatest Yankee first basemen of all time? So I know people get mad at WAR. They don't like WAR. They say, what does it show? But it's a compilation statistic that at least has an opportunity to enlighten and to allow for discussion and debate. And the next greatest Yankee first baseman after Mattingly is Wally Pipp, who is underrated and forgotten about. Actually, the first Yankee ever to lead the league in home runs was Wally Pipp. And then you've got Moose Skowron. So he is, by WAR at least, the 4th greatest Yankee first baseman. The next 2, believe it or not, are Jason Giambi and Mark Teixeira. And those 2 guys finish out the top 50 all time. Teixeira comes in 47th all time. The last guy on the list is Wade Boggs. It brings up an interesting thing.
Go ahead.
Wade Boggs' WAR as a Yankee was 18.3. Now, I don't have the top 100. Baseball Reference only gives you the top 50.
I think of him as a third baseman, Wade Boggs.
Oh, yeah, no, he is a third baseman. I'm saying he's rounding out the Yankee top 50.
Oh, okay.
3 WAR fewer than Wade Boggs, not in the top 50, is the aforementioned Chris Chambliss at 15.4. Underneath Chris Chambliss, who had only 14.4 WAR as a Yankee, is Tino Martinez, which brings me to a different topic. Believe it or not, that Tino is that far down. And yet, and listen, we all love Tino. When I have these discussions like this, people start to say, like, how can you not like that player? How can you not like Tino Martinez? No, we like Tino Martinez. But there's something wrong when Tino Martinez is in Monument Park and Moose Skowron is not.
That's what I was going to get on next. Wow, well, you read my mind. I couldn't wait for the opening to talk about Monument Park. Obviously, you can't talk about your guy Roy White, his biographer. So I'm not going to ask you who's more worthy, Roy White or so and so, who's not in Monument Park. We all agree Roy White should be in. We all agree Greg Nettles should be in. But I was going to do the comparison, Moose Scarin and Tino Martinez. Something struck me wrong. Moose Scarin won as much as Tino Martinez did with the Yankees. So don't give me the argument world championships the Yankees won. The Yankees won the same way, with Moose Scarin. And, and he seemed to be a better player than Tino Martinez. The numbers would bear that out. And yet there's not even a discussion about him being in Monument Park. I think it's right now it has commercial value, Monument Park. I hate to say it. They benefit more with the current guys, the 1990, late 1990, early 200 Yankee teams. I mean, Mark Teixeira would get into Monument Park sooner than Moose Scarin would. You get that feeling. He wouldn't deserve to, but you get the feeling if the Yankees had a choice to put one or the other in, they'd put Mark Teixeira in because he's recent and Moose Scarin isn't.
Yeah, the problem with Monument Park, as I see it, is it's this place where the Yankees want to honor their greatest players, and yet they don't use Monument Park to honor their greatest players. They honor very good players. They honor noteworthy players. They honor players who were part of championship teams or were great Yankees, but there's no rhyme or reason for who gets into Monument Park. You're talking about before the show, you're talking about the Hall of Fames, various Hall of Fames, including the Boxing Hall of Fame and the New York Boxing Hall of Fame. And all of these organizations have set criteria, voting and procedures and dates for events and when elections will be and when somebody will get in. The Yankees have this really special place where they want to honor their great players, but there's no rhyme or reason. They might get two guys this year. They might go 5 years without putting anybody there. When a guy is now announced that he's going to be in the Monument Park, they never tell you why that player is at the exclusion of somebody else. Allie Reynolds, the great Yankee pitcher, is there. But when Allie Reynolds was pitching, he was part of the big three: Reynolds, Rashi, and Lopat. I mentioned them earlier. Reynolds is in, Rashi is not, Lopat is not. It makes no sense.
Let me ask you this. You put Jason Giambi using WAR. Do you really consider Jason Giambi a great Yankee first baseman? Defensively, he was flawed. I mean, he has a pop in his bat. But, I mean, he was, to me, he would be low on the list. He didn't play for the Yankees for a long time. I mean, how can he get in a category of the greatest Yankees first baseman?
I was just reading how they rank by WAR. It's all based upon.
Okay, so you're talking over their career, not as
no, just as a Yankee.
Really?
Yeah.
See, that's where WAR is flawed.
I just want to say something about the 1963 World Series. Scarin was traded during the 63 season, correct, from the Yankees to the Dodgers?
He was actually traded, I believe, before the season. He was traded November 26, 1962.
Okay.
So in the offseason.
But the GOAT of the 1963 World Series, I know the Yankees got swept, but who they blamed was Joe Pepitone because it was the final game, a throw to first base, a simple out that he should have caught just went by his glove. So Joe Pepitone was actually the GOAT, If the Yankee fans needed someone to blame, they blamed Joe Pepitone for not making the simplest of plays.
Well, Pepitone was one of these guys with a ton of ability. He could have been great. I mean, the name of his autobiography was Joe, You Could Have Made Us Proud. A player who really never lived up to the potential and the hope that the Yankees had for him.
But one of the most liked Yankees, at least in his era. I mean, everyone loved him. George Steinbrenner brought him back as a hitting coach, even like George liked him a lot.
Well, I got a trivia question for you both. Where did he get the nickname Moose from?
I would assume it was because he was a big, strong guy. That's what I would say.
That's what I thought. But when he was playing with the semi-pro team, his father, of course, they're from Italy, and the haircut they said looked like Mussolini's.
Oh,
they-
interesting.
So they called him Moose for short. That's where he got his nickname from when he played semi-pro. Moose also, like Chris Chambliss, and this is why I asked you that, Doc. You know, he did a lot of game tying, and he drove in some runs. He made defensive outs to end games for the Yankees. I know he put him in a game 7, tied the game for the Yankees to win, and that's what it reminds me of Chris Chambliss. I mean, me growing up a Yankee fan, of course, is that home run against KC Royals, right? He might not have been the greatest first baseman, but that kind of made him a legendary in my mind, because here go the Yankees back, to a World Series again. So,
correct, and he belongs as much as Tino. Chris Chambliss belongs at Monument Park. I mean, when you talk about the most iconic Yankee home runs of all time,
I don't know about Chris Chambliss. I mean, it's great, the iconic home run. Then I could start arguing if the Yankees win a World Series. I'm not going to start arguing Aaron Boone belongs in Monument Park.
Yeah, but Aaron Boone was a Yankee for 10 minutes. Chris Chambliss was a Yankee for a long time.
No, he'd be a Yankie as a manager, plus having the iconic home run.
Well,
Chris Chambliss doesn't belong, right?
We're talking about is the Yankees return to the World Series after how many years? Since what?
He hit a home run. Great.
Maybe the most.
One of the most iconic home runs in Yankee history.
I mean, when they show the Yankees clips today, they still show that Chris Chambliss home run. That's how big that was. They show that more than they show the Bucky Dent home run.
Because it was a bigger home run.
Yes,
it was a more important home run.
And a better defensive first baseman than maybe some up there higher on the list as first baseman.
I'm not sure you're right, Doc. That's a debatable thing, whether or not the Chambliss homer was bigger than the Dent homer. The Chambliss homer was a walk-off homer, but hypothetically, worst case scenario, if the Yankees didn't score in the bottom of the ninth against Kansas City, then extra innings. So it's anyone's game. If Dent doesn't hit the home run, and they're down 2-0, to the Red Sox.
What inning was Bucky Dent's home run hit?
7th inning.
Okay, and then the home run that won that game. The home run that won that game was hit by who?
You're talking the one difference run in the 5-4 game. Well,
that's
Reggie
correct.
hit a homer.
Reggie's home run.
When Reggie hit a homer, they were up 4-2. It made it
right. But he got him. Well, that 5th run is what won the game for him.
I mean,
you're saying is Bucky Dent's home run was great and it was glorious and it was wonderful, but it didn't win the game. It was in the 7th inning. Yeah, Chris Chambliss's home run propelled the Yankees to the World Series for the first time since 1964. Chris Chambliss, Bucky Dent, and I can't believe we're arguing, trying to minimize Bucky Dent's home run, but Bucky Dent's home run came the year after the Yankees had won the World Series. They'd already won it. It wasn't as momentous. It was just like Aaron Boone's home run.
I could say it was more momentous because the Yankees didn't win the World Series in 76, but they went on to win it in 78. Dent's homer propelled them to that.
Dent's home run helped propel them to that.
Well, they wouldn't have won that division. That's a good chance.
Correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong. Didn't Chambliss follow up with another big home run to win the game or to tie the game in 77 or 78? I'm trying to remember.
I'd have to go back and look at all the box scores.
In 1977, the following season, in the 6th game of the World Series that they clinched, Chambliss did hit a 2-run homer.
Yeah,
Reggie hit 3. Chambliss hit a home run 2. Yeah.
Right. So I remember that too. But getting back, that's why I'm drawing the comparisons to Moose, because I'm reading, in Game 7 he tied the game up and helped propel the Yankees to win the World Series this year. This is why I asked you that question, Doc. And to me, when we talk about the big stars, in any sport, there's always those other guys that come up with big hits or big plays, whether it's, Billy Martin, who was unbelievable in a World Series, or Phil Rizzuto.
I can never give Martin credit.
or Phil Rizzuto, who did what he did in the World Series, and Bucky Dent, who did what he did in the World Series.
Bucky Dent was a World Series MVP, yes.
So I mean, we talk about Chambliss, we talk about, well, not so much Chambliss, but we talk about Jackson, maybe Nettles hitting the big, having big games. The Jackson.
Roy White had a great World Series in 1978.
True. So there are other people, and to me, this is where Moose comes in, where he's forgotten because of the bigger names, and without him, maybe the Yankees don't win the World Series.
Well, it's like a good Yankee player today. Let's say the Yankees win the championship, and Soto and Judge play fantastic from this point forward. They've been obviously outstanding, for the most part as is. But if they continue it to a World Championship, who on the Yankees would be given recognition if they were really, really good the rest of the way? They get overshadowed by the Judge-Soto combo, and that's what happened with Muscara, and the Maris-Mantle combo just overshadowed them.
Correct, but again, Moose was an all-star 8 different times. So, yes. I mean, he was recognized as a very good player. It's just that history hasn't treated him as well. In the time, he was regarded much better. And again, just to finish the point, if the Yankees are going to have a thing called Monument Park and they're going to honor their greatest or their most legendary players, they have to use that space to honor their most legendary and important players. And they don't. And that's the problem. And there's no rhyme or reason why people are there. It's whoever it is that makes that decision at the Yankee hierarchy says, you know what? We're going to put Tino in there. That's great. But when you put a guy like Tino in there, and again, nothing against Tino Martinez, you are actually belittling the careers of the guys who were better than him who aren't in. Guys like Roy White, Greg Nettles. I was just going to mention Hank Bauer. Right? When I do my talks about the least among them, I talk about Hank Bauer a lot. Hank Bauer was a better Yankee right fielder than Paul O'Neill. Hank Bauer belongs out there. Paul O'Neill's out there. Hank Bauer belongs out there. And it's wrong that the Yankees use this as you were saying before, as a marketing thing, as a way to get people into the stands and not as a way to recognize the players who were the best players in their history. And that is something that really needs to change.
Why don't the Yankees have a team Hall of Fame?
No, I think they should, but they use Monument Park in that way.
No, not everyone should be in Monument Park. It should just be the legends in Monument Park, and then the outstanding Yankees like the Greg Nettles, the Roy Whites. They should be in the Team Hall of Fame. Okay, don't give them a place in Monument Park, but put them in the Yankee Hall of Fame. You have your ceremony the day with the Hall of Famers inducted. That would be the way to go about it. You put Garrett Mantle in Monument Park and most of them on the Team Hall of Fame, but not in Monument Park.
I agree, but they already have some of these guys in Monument Park. They use Monument Park as the Hall of Fame.
Right. That's what I was just going to say.
And that's what's
Another
wrong.
thing people might know, during the time that the Moose played, there were two All-Star games in a year.
That's correct.
And how did they divide that up? Did they have an All-Star game like in a half at the end, or did they have an All-Star game after the season, Doc? Or was it a quarter and 3/4? How did they come about that?
That's a great question. I'm going to look it up right now.
I don't remember, but I'll say this. It meant so much to the players at the time, American League against National League. That doesn't mean anything at all now. Who's better, American League, National League? To no timer like myself, there's still a tiny bit of a carryover. I'd like to see the American League win, but it's so unimportant now. It only means to me about 10% of what it used to mean. It's so little. I guess because of interleague play, but in all fairness, even though someone could be a purist, interleague play is a good thing in the sense it allows fans to see all the players, visit their cities.
But Jack, I think it's more than that. I think it's because of the play now. I don't think they play as hard as they used to, and
that's correct.
And I don't think you've had your best players out there, and they played for as long as the manager thought. Just because you were an all-star team didn't mean you played, and that's changed a lot too. They're going to throw a pitcher every inning, and that's the way it's set up now. Where if you had a great pitcher, you may let him pitch 4 innings, 5 innings during an All-Star game.
Well, they want to get everyone in the game if they
Well,
can.
that's
like,
what I'm
Right.
saying.
So
That's
it's
what I'm
nothing but a glorified scrimmage game.
saying.
It used to
Exactly.
be interesting. And Mac, you asked in 1959 there were 2 All-Star games. I'll give you the dates. One was played on July 7th, and the next one was played on August 3rd. The first one was played in Pittsburgh. The second was played in Los Angeles.
So they waited 2 months. So
a month between them.
Okay, a month between them. So that to me, I've always talked to Jack about, I think the All-Star game being played halfway through is a mistake, because the second half of the year, that All-Star might fall off, whether it's a pitcher or a hitter or whatever. And by the end of the year, your pitcher that was starting and he was 6-1, say, could be 6-12. And to me, I think the All-Star game should be pushed back further. So that we get a better read on who really is the All-Star that year and who may have fell off the wagon. So, I don't know if they could do that or not, but because you're batting 370 in July, and by the end of the season, you're batting 220. It's kind of not a clear, to me, season for an All-Star.
Guys, I just had a great idea. Let's do away with American League versus National League for the All-Star game and let it be the defending World Series champions play an All-Star team, the best players outside of their team, and make the stakes something like $1 million for the winning team, $500,000 for the losing team, where the players, I don't care how much money they're making, $500,000 for one game, they're going to want that $500,000. They're going to play hard for it.
It's interesting. I don't think it's realistic, because you look at what happens, like the last Yankee World Series team. Who was the MVP? Hideki Matsui wasn't even a Yankee the next year.
No. Well, you want to? How about this? Okay. You allow the player to come back to his old team for that game. And I don't think the player would mind it. He would be nostalgic. They would welcome him back as teammates for one game. It would be cool. He was part of the championship. He comes back to play for his team that game if he wants.
Interesting.
It's interesting. I don't see it happening, but it's interesting.
Well, Doc, what's more interesting, that or fan involvement? The fan could get the ball in the stands and throw it back.
No, go back to that silly. That's a crazy.
You see with the Yankees the other day, I forgot what the game was. The fan threw it in from left field, Yankee fan, and he made a heck of a throw that went to the mound.
He made a heck of a throw. I think after that you get thrown out of the game too. I don't think you're allowed to stay in the park.
We eventually will get that new rule put in there. But let's talk a little bit about the greatest featherweight of all time. And when we talk about boxing, we talk about heavyweights, welterweights, middleweights. We really don't talk about the light and featherweights. And there was one, that very special featherweight, Jack.
Yeah, Willie Pep, a big name from years ago. You know what it is? As time goes by, people tend to forget some of these icons. It becomes faded from memory. They don't talk today about them as much. It could be a Bob Cousy in basketball, for example. He was like the biggest name in the NBA his time. But what does Bob Cousy mean today to people? They go on social media. No one's talking about Bob Cousy. In a way, it's the same with Willie Pep. Maybe not quite to that point. A movie just came out, The Featherweight, Mac. We were talking about it the other day. I haven't seen it yet. Based on Willie Pep, not his whole career, from what I understand, like the latest stages. But to give you an idea how good Willie Pep is, you see all the fanboys today, they invent records. The people invent records. They say, Marciano was unbeaten, 49-0. He holds the record. And I say, what record? He doesn't hold any record. It's made up. And then Floyd Mayweather goes out of his way to pass it. He takes safe fights at the end of his career. He fights a guy, Conor McGregor, who didn't even have a pro fight, just so he could get his 50th win. Now, Mayweather retires 50-0, and people are asking, is Mayweather the greatest fighter of all time? Because he holds the record. He's unbeaten at 50-0, okay? Willie Pep was unbeaten in his first 62 fights. Imagine that. First 62 fights. He was unbeaten in 12 more fights than Mayweather. Then he lost a fight. He's a featherweight. He lost to a fighter, Sammy Angat, who had just retired as world lightweight champion, and today it would be 2 divisions higher than featherweight. He loses a close decision to Angat, a great fighter who's in the Hall of Fame, and then Willie Pep proceeds to be unbeaten in his next 73 fights after that. Imagine that. He goes 72-0-1 after going 62-0 and losing a close decision to a Hall of Famer. You give Mayweather those additional fights. I mean, I can't say what he'd do, but believe me, I would lay heavy odds to get just a little back in return that he couldn't match that. You know, he probably wouldn't come close to matching it. He'd probably lose 5-6 times. You know, that's the equivalent of Joe DiMaggio following his 56-game hitting streak being broken, and then him following up something and like hitting in 65 straight games after that. You know, it's insane. And Willie Pep, the second part of his career, he was still a winning fighter, but unfortunately he was known for his fights with Sandy Sadler. And he had been through the mill somewhat when he had those fights. He was in a horrific plane crash, horrific private plane crash. He survived, but he broke his back. Recuperation was hard. He was never the same fighter again. He was still a great fighter, but he lost something. It was like an athlete having a terrible knee injury, a terrible arm injury. They could still come back and be great, but they're not as great as they were, okay? And, you know, he lost the title to Sandy Sadler. He regained it. Then he lost a couple other fights later to Sadler. Willie Pep was winning both fights on points. One was because of his eye was closed. The other, he threw out his shoulder. I question Willie Pep's resolve in those later fights. Sadler was a freak of nature. Like at that time, he was the tallest featherweight in history, and he was a great fighter in his own right. And Pep, you know, he had controversy around him. You know, like most fighters, he didn't know how to handle his money, guys. And reportedly, he threw a fight to Lulu Perez, you know, and got stopped late in his career. And the reason there was a lot of suspicion, because Pep was obviously a much better fighter than the guy he fought, Lulu Perez. That was obvious, yet the odds shifted closer to fight time, and all of a sudden, they started to favor Lulu Perez. That's how crazy the odds were. So before the first bell rang, there was tremendous suspicion whether it was on the level, and then Pep gets stopped, and a ton of people that didn't believe that result was real at all. You know, I mean, and Pep he was a really like happy-go-lucky, carefree guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him really in the 1990s at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. In fact, this is a funny story. I was asked in the mid-90s to do a ringside lecture with the great Willie Pep. I was psyched. I'm going to host a ringside lecture with Willie Pep. I see him the night before, and I have the whole agenda set, like what we're going to talk about, this. He's completely disinterested. He says, take it easy, relax, we'll jazz it up, it'll be fine. He doesn't want to hear about it. You know, so I'm prepared anyway. It rains all night, and I wonder whether the ringside lecture is going to be held because it's outside. It clears up right before we're to go on. It's something like 10 in the morning. And I'm out there, a big crowd gathers. No Willie Pep to be seen. I can't get in touch with him anyway. I am waiting. And then I have to start the ringside lecture all by myself, saying Willie should be here any moment. 40 minutes later, you guys know the way I could talk, but after 40 minutes of talking, I see referee Arthur McCanty Sr. walking around the grounds, who knew me well. And I asked him to come in to save me the way he saved fighters who are getting battered. So he comes up after 40 minutes because I was all talked out. Pep never shows up.
Wow.
I mean, that was kind of Willie Pep, but he was a funny guy. I remember banquet once. Okay, Willie Pep was married like 5 times. That's nothing to brag about, believe me. But he's called up to the podium to talk, and the crowd was on the edge of their seats. It was the equivalent of Ted Williams talking about hitting. Everyone in baseball would be interested. They'd be on the edge of their seats, listening to what Ted Williams had to say, the words of wisdom. So they start off, Willie, who's the greatest fighter you ever saw? He goes, my third wife. They go, Willie, who hit you the hardest? He goes, my first wife. He says, Willie, who was your toughest opponent? He says, my second wife. And that's it. And then he walks off the stage.
That's
So
unbelievable.
Willie Pep, crowd is laughing, but no answers, no
Right.
anything, you know. But if he had a weakness, he wasn't a hard puncher as a fighter. He was the equivalent of Pernell Whitaker. You know, Whitaker wasn't a hard puncher. Mayweather wasn't a hard puncher. Willie Pep was considered a defensive genius. I don't know how accurate this story is, but he once reportedly, this could be a complete myth, it's got to get researched more. He reportedly won a round once without throwing a punch. He said he'd win the round on the judges' scorecards, and reportedly a couple of judges scored it for him a fight in Minneapolis. You have to do some really heavy research to see, is that a myth? Is that true? But he was a defensive genius. The guy just didn't get hit. And Angelo Dundee, I was talking to him, I'm summing up, about a guy who's now in the Hall of Fame, a Mexican, Erik Morales. Angelo Dundee would never really build up the old timers compared to the guys of his, you know, the modern guys. He was right down the middle. And I said, oh, how would Pep have done with Morales? You know, just talking hypothetically, he said, he would have licked Morales. And Angelo was a real expert at picking fights.
So, Jack, I got a couple things. If he was in a position to retire after 62-0, no one even really came close to him. He had 12 more fights than when I know he couldn't because of, you know, being married 5-6 times, like you said, and you know he was he liked to play. He was a playboy from what I saw. I did watch the trailer of the featherweight, and it doesn't give a lot of information. It has been shown overseas in Italy, supposedly to a 10-minute standing ovation. It's rated 100% on a Rotten Tomatoes. They're like critics of film. So I don't know what's taking so long for it to hit the United States to play. We of course know John Scully, who was involved in making the movie and as you know instructing part of the fights and stuff. And you know, I don't know if you know this guy, Kid Campeche. He said fighting Willie Pep was like putting out a grass fire. I mean, he was all around you, you know, with his defense and with his boxing ability. And as you said, he really didn't have no power, but he was considered one time. I know if he's considered today too, Jack, as one of the greatest pound for pound fighters ever.
He is. He still is. Yeah, he's considered. He would, if anyone put him on their top 5 list, the greatest of all time, I don't think they'd get a big argument. Even the people who would disagree, no one would say, oh, that's ridiculous, that doesn't make sense. They would just say, I disagree, I don't think he was, but no one would go crazy about it again, think it was way out of line. And there's a lot of people who think it would be valid. If you put him as number 1 on the pound for pound list of all time, I don't think people would they would disagree. Most people wouldn't, but I don't think anyone would quite say it's kind of crazy, you know, if you did it. They would understand the logic behind, you know, making Willie Pep, you know, number 1 in that sense. I mean, think of the 2 acts. Floyd Mayweather was 50-0, and the modern people, some fanboys are saying, oh, he's the greatest. Willie Pep's 2 acts, 62-0 is better than 50-0.
Yeah.
And then Pep lost to a Hall of Famer, a very close decision. A Hall of Famer in a heavier weight class, he loses a close decision. And then his second act is 72 wins, no losses, 1 draw. Both of them are better than 50, and though both segments in between. It's and then but he was in the plane crash. It kind of took its toll, and then you get older. You get older, and late on in your career, you fight too long, or you don't. In those days, they didn't pick their spots. They fought everyone.
Yeah,
you didn't fight just 2 times a year. You fought constantly, and you fought the best guys available.
And in 1945, Fighter of the Year, Boxing Hall of Fame, International 2014. From what I got here, check the movie is about when he's making his last comeback, and of course, he had money problems. I imagine he's paying alimony and
He told me once we were talking about that. I remember to him, he volunteered. He says, "No, we just rent." Like, now. So he was we should tell you something, Yeah.
And like all great fighters back then, the Joe Lewises and that, and that's what they depended on. And then they, burn their money away, whatever they were doing. And in the trailer it showed he wanted to be the best dressed and drive the best cards. And again, 6 wives, that'll take a toll out of you. So great. Listen, I hope this movie comes to, how much I love boxing, to the United States, especially from this fighter coming from Connecticut, for where I'm from. We had Johnny Dukes and a couple other famous fighters that are trainers that came from here, but no more famous than Willie Pep. They filmed it right here in Hartford, Connecticut, and they tried to make it as realistic as they could, and really interesting. I can't wait for that.
Well, when Oscar De La Hoya was in his prime, at one point he changed his style, and he said, "I want to be just like Willie Pep." And this is ironic. The weekend of the International Boxing Hall of Fame, when De La Hoya fought Julio Cesar Chavez for the first time, they had a big banquet room at the Turning Stone Casino in Verona, New York, near where the Hall of Fame was, held in Canastota. And all these legends were there. And Willie Pep was at a different table from me. And when the commentator said on the screen, De La Hoya he said he wants to be another Willie Pep. Willie Pep threw his hands up like this, kind of, like, hey, like he got that tribute, and everyone looked towards him.
Yeah,
so that was kind of cool.
He seemed to be a very a character way back when. So
and he was a funny guy too. When I saw him at one of these gatherings, it was a table, a lot of the old timers. I had a story I'd written on Gene Fulmer, former middleweight champion. And one of the titles was what Fulmer was quoted: "Getting knocked out by Sugar Ray was a blessing in disguise." So Pep wanted to see it, and Pep was showing it to people. He said, "Can you imagine this, saying getting knocked out was a blessing in disguise?" He kind of was mocking fun, at Gene Fulmer, in a friendly way. Right.
I mean, I love the amount of fights they did, and that they were true during the true time of boxing. I really love watching any kind of videos or films from that.
And a lot of the ball players, I'll tell you, were big boxing fans, baseball players.
Sure.
They used to make it a point to go to the fights, because the fights oftentimes would be held in the stadiums they played in, like Yankee Stadium. I mean, Joe DiMaggio was a tremendous fight fan. I mean, Mickey Mantle would go to the fights for Whitey Ford. It was kind of common thing. Billy Martin even kind of officially co-managed this fight as Sammy Serrano a while. They kind of like to be around that atmosphere.
I'm surprised Billy Martin didn't get in the ring a couple times as much as he loved to fight.
Yeah, we didn't even cover maybe another time that Yankee brawl on the field yesterday with the Oriole player getting hit in the head. I hope Clay Holmes didn't do that on purpose, guys.
They said he didn't. They said he didn't.
We'll talk about it Monday. I mean, they've been throwing at each other all season, so I mean,
that's why I'm a little suspicious. But I hope, if you wanted to hit him lower, you never go for a guy's head.
I don't think that anybody with any decency about him would throw it at somebody's head and try to hit him. They may try to back.
If I wanted to put Doc on the spot, if I really wanted to put Doc on the spot, we know how honorable a man Doc is, how compassionate and kind. And Doc's a pitcher. Does Doc protect his teammates?
Yeah, in my leagues, we don't get a whole lot of.
I'm putting you on the spot, Doc. You could handle. Your team is getting hit by pitches. You're on the mound. They're looking towards you to protect you. And Billy Martin's your manager. Billy Martin is your manager.
I
Doc.
quit.
I knew he'd say that. So the last part of the show, everybody, Dallas Cowboys, maybe the most viable or the most expensive team if you wanted to buy a team, the Dallas Cowboy, America's team. But there was a time they weren't, before the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders and that big marketing machine they had, and having the star and bigger than life Texas. They weren't always that. In fact, they were almost moved. The Washington Redskins were almost moved to Dallas, believe it or not. One of their biggest rivalries back then. And it was the owner at that time of the Washington Redskins. See if I can get all these names for you. In 1959, an oilman, Clint Marchison, was going to buy the Washington Redskins and move them to Dallas from George Marshall, who owned the team at the time. And at the last minute, believe it or not, it was going to happen. Marshall changed the rules of the contract, and Murchison got ticked off about it. But the band leader from the Washington Redskins, who wrote the music to Hail to the Redskins, approached Murchison about buying the rights to the song. Now, Marshall's wife, believe it or not, penned the words to this. She's the one that wrote the lyrics to Hail to the Redskins, but the band owner owned the music. So once the band owner sold it to the Murchison guy who tried to buy the Redskins, and Marshall put the kibosh on at the end, at the next NFL owners meeting, said, "You are not allowed to play Hail to the Redskins anymore because I own the rights. So every game that they play in, you cannot play this song." And of course, with the personal connection with his wife and the song, Hail to the Redskins was very popular, they weren't allowed to play it. So back in 1960, when the AFL was coming in and all the teams, the NFL was trying to expand too, to kind of keep up with the AFL. And the two teams up there were a Dallas team, which Murchison ended up working out a trade, give me this money so I can start the franchise. And that's how he got the Dallas Cowboys. The Minnesota Vikings were also a franchise team back then. So he takes the team, he moves it down to Texas, and it's not called the Cowboys right away. It's called the Texas Steers, believe it or not. That was the original name of the Dallas Cowboys. And I can imagine the helmets on those, the helmet insignias, the logos on those helmets. They then decided not to do that, and they were going to change it to the Dallas Rangers. The Texas Rangers at that time had was a semi-pro team, and they were losing money. So he was going to buy the rights to the Rangers. The Rangers pivot. They start making money, so he can't use the Rangers. So he ends up naming, and then they become the Dallas Cowboys. So Murchison, who owns the team, hires CBS executive and former Rams team president and GM Tex Stram. They also take a scout from the San Francisco 49ers, Gil Brandt, and they hire the former defensive coordinator of the New York Giants, Tom Landry, to lead the team. Now, in the beginning, in 1960, they didn't win a game. They went 0-11-1. They didn't play like the other teams did because they were an expansion team. They didn't play their division twice. They had to play all the football teams. So imagine traveling from city to city and going ahead and playing all these teams. So they lost every game. The following year wasn't much better. I mean, they drafted Don Meredith back then. They drafted Perkins, their running back then. But because of the timing of their franchise to become a new franchise, they missed the draft. He had signed Meredith and their great running back, Don Perkins, before the draft. And two other teams drafted Don Meredith, believe it or not. Don Meredith was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts, the Baltimore Colts at that time. And he was also drafted by the Chicago Bears. And George Halas was instrumental in letting, because they were an expansion team, Dallas have Don Meredith. Before there was a little quarterback, 5'9" quarterback that that was a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. But Don Meredith ended up coming up. They also, the following year, drafted Bob Louie, Mr. Cowboy himself. And the following year, they had a supplemental draft like they do in hockey right now, where they could invade other teams' rosters. And the teams protected so many players, so they could take players from other teams to help develop their squad. So Dallas ended up tying the New York Giants in the first year. Of course, being a former Giant coach, I gotta do that. In 1961, they finished 4-6-1, and they moved into the Eastern Conference. Minnesota Vikings went to the North Conference, and that's why they ended up there. And that's why Dallas ended up in Eastern Conference to even the teams at the time out. Everybody had, well, why is Dallas there? That's why Dallas is in Eastern Conference, to even up these things. The following year, 1962, they were 5-8-1. The offense finished among the league's best, but their defense, surprisingly, wasn't. And Tom Landry, an innovator on defense, you would think that would be the best part of the team. At that time, it was not. It was the offense, believe it or not. In 1963, after drafting Bob Louie and Chuck Howley and Don Meredith, they dropped to 4-10. They got worse. They drafted linebacker Leroy Jordan. People that know the Dallas Cowboys know he was a very good linebacker. So instead of them firing Tom Landry, you imagine a coach today having losing seasons 4 years in a row. In fact, getting worse. Today, that coach would be fired. They didn't do that with Tom Landry. They signed him to a 10-year extension, the biggest contract of its time. So they knew what they had in Tom Landry, and they knew being an expansion team, maybe they could be patient. But even if an expansion team today, Jack, in hockey or football or even baseball, if you had 4 terrible seasons where you're winning maybe 40% or 30% of your games, I don't think they would hold on to a coach.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned the word patience for losing seasons in a row, but the Cowboys were patient with Tom Landry. Tom Landry used to have a saying, it takes a quarterback 5 years to be a really good NFL quarterback. And he said in the case of Roger Staubach, he was so mature, it would take Staubach only 2. But the point is, you compare what he said to the modern NFL. No NFL team is going to say, well, we have a 5-year plan for this player. I mean, we'd hear that term in baseball. Managers would say they have a 5-year plan. I always thought that was bogus because that gave them an excuse to lose for 3-4 years and be under no pressure. And they could always say, well, I have a 5-year plan. But Landry would always say that and mean it about his quarterbacks. It takes 5 years for a quarterback to develop to really be good. And if he was, and you look at a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who's had 3 years. I mean, maybe he's following the Landry model. But in the modern NFL today, they're not waiting 5 years on guys. And they, it'll be very rare, only in the case of Lawrence, because he was the #1 overall choice in the draft. But we don't have patience, even with head coaches, for losing seasons in a row. What coach is going to really survive that? It's hard.
And not only that, you get worse. I mean, not getting better. You got worse the last year of that before they signed him. There is no way today they would do that. And, of course, we all know the Dallas Cowboys, after 60, 65 and that, they start challenging for the championships and that. It worked. But as you said, I mean, if Aaron Boone was managing the Yankees and in 4 straight years they were below 500, I don't think he would last 4 years, even being the GM's boy there. I don't think he would last that long.
Well, I think part of it, guys, is social media and media pressure. I think it wears on ownership. During that time in the early 60s, you didn't have the scrutiny you'd have today. Of people really getting on Tom Landry's case. And the fan base wasn't as strong then as it is today. Today, ownership, they don't want to hear the complaints. They're human. And when the fan base comes at them with a big fury, they're under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I would agree.
You mentioned head coach losing year after year after year and having this much time. There is a coach in the NFL and the AFC and the AFC East who coaches a team that plays in New Jersey who has 3 losing seasons in a row, and he's about to start his 4th. So that's Robert Saleh.
And how much patience after this year, if the Jets don't make the playoffs, what's going to happen?
We'll see.
I think, Doc, Salah was given a pass by owner Woody Johnson because of the Rodgers injury. Owners are human beings. They try to be understanding. Woody Johnson was actually an ambassador, from England. So he kind of knows people to understand. And he was all in on the Jets getting Rodgers. And his attitude is, okay, we're going to run it back. I'm not going to blame the coach, but now there can't be any excuses.
Right, but we do have a coach. You just said it doesn't really happen, but it's happening.
Well, I said what I was saying, Doc. Would they give Saleh a 10-year extension now? That would not happen.
That would not happen.
Which they did with Tom Landry, and that's and I mean that much faith in a guy. I mean. They knew I think they just knew what they had there. And again, Dallas was one of the first to use computers to draft players and numbers. And then the Cowboy cheerleaders went all around the world and they played in the second half of the day instead of playing Thanksgiving Day. I mean, they promoted this team to where it is today, but it wasn't always like that. And a lot of people don't realize. And I didn't realize if it wasn't for a hail to the Redskins, there might never have been a Dallas Cowboy team. Not at that time anyway, which was very
the Cowboy-Redskin rivalry, I feel, if you look historically from then to now, I think is one of the stronger ones in sports, perhaps. I think it's stronger than the Cowboys-Eagles, Cowboys-Giants. Right today, Cowboys-Eagles is a stronger one, obviously, because they're both on top. And the Washington Commanders, known as the Redskins in the past, it's not quite as relevant right now, but that used to be like a heck of a rivalry, one of the best in sports.
Do you think the owner, because of what happened with the Redskins at that time, do you think they named them Cowboys on purpose to set up a rivalry, Cowboys versus the Redskins? Do you think he was that smart?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I never heard of that one.
I didn't either. I'm just thinking it as a guy who's ticked off at the Redskins.
No, but the rivalry didn't really take shape at that time, so it wasn't
But it did form a base for it because it was about the Redskins moving to Dallas, right? That was, and the fight between the two owners. So sort of like what happened with the Red Sox. I just things I think about. I don't know. Maybe I'm right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's ridiculous. There might be something to it. I mean, who knows?
Yes. So, folks, we covered today for you. We covered Moose Skowron, a guy forgotten and that I rarely heard of before meeting Doc and Jack. What he was to the Yankees back in the 50s when they were winning World Series. Maybe wouldn't have won a couple World Series if he wasn't there. He wasn't Mantle or Maris, but he was part of the, I guess you could say, the Triple M boys with Moose, Maris, and Mantle. But anyway, and Jack, great analysis of Willie Pep, one of the greatest boxers, period. I don't care what weight class you're talking about, one of the greatest boxers in the history of the sport. And we gave you a little peek behind the Redskins and the Cowboys rivalry and why at one time the Cowboys were not America's team. So thanks for joining us today. I enjoy this. I know that, talking to two great experts in sports and going over the past and seeing what's set up, the present day and how it's going to go into the future. Love doing this show. Join us tomorrow. We have the big football show, best Sunday football show on the air, on the net. Anywhere you can say. And of course, Jack is back with Glove Fist on Northeast Streaming Sports with Frank Latirzo as they break down boxing, and then followed up by Dr. Paul and Dr. EJ Fagan, who do their Yankee show, Start Spreading News. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Saturday. Stay out of trouble. We'll see you.